on the record, and I did that for your benefit. Hi, Kat.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Both of us, on the day we're recording this, both of us have had hell of a days, but for sort of different reasons and whatnot. And we'll get into that. But thanks very much for doing this. I really do appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, now I'm curious what your day was about.
Oh no, we'll get into that. We'll get into
Okay.
that.
Okay.
It's nowhere
Okay.
near as pertinent to the rule of law and to people's futures as your day, but it was my own day. But anyway, thank you for doing it.
Absolutely.
I want to thank everybody for joining us. Welcome to Did You Know That? Question mark. This is the channel I created so that I could have conversations with people like Kat about the topic we're about to discuss. And I want to get this out of the way very early. This is going to be a very adult conversation about a very sensitive topic. And so I'm giving everybody a forewarning. Kat may look very innocent and whatnot, but she's got a hell of a job that takes her to some very dark places. And so if you have a sensitive heart, sensitive stomach, sensitive ears, or any of the nature, you have been forewarned. If you continue on, you do so at your own peril, for lack of better words. So again, my name is Sean O'Rourke. This is, I don't know what video in order because I don't know what date this is actually going to air, but we're recording this in September of 2020, so we're in the midst of pandemic. And I want to thank you again for joining us on the channel. If you like this conversation at the end, or if you like the previous conversations, please make sure to subscribe with the bell so you get notified when new videos get posted. If you've just joining us, I am a cyber liability consultant when I am not interviewing interesting people like Kat. And that essentially means that I prepare companies to be hacked. And you can get into more of that if you looked at my LinkedIn profile. So now, Kat, you're going to tell the fine folks what you do.
Right on. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have a conversation. I'm Kat Thomas. I represent victims of sexual violence and civil litigation. So generally what I do is I bring civil lawsuits. I don't do anything with the criminal cases. I mean, there's overlap with the kind of work I do, but I'm not a prosecutor. I don't work for the state. And we represent the victim and generally my cases are for victims of sexual assault or child sexual abuse. I use the word victim in a legalese sense. I do know that many people choose to identify as a survivor. Again, me saying victim does not reflect on an identity of a person. It's simply what we say in legal terms. So I'm excited to be here and talk with you.
Well, I thank you for this. And I know it's you and I met through a mutual friend of ours.
Yes, we did.
And so the moment I found out what you did, I was immediately interested and knew I wanted to have you on the channel. So let's first start out with, how did you get into this line of legal work? Because I got to imagine it's not necessarily the one that everybody coming out of law school is going to seek out.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, my background, even in undergrad, I like doing stuff, working on gender-based violence issues. And in my undergrad and during law school, I did internships with UN agencies, and we did a lot with sexual violence against women and the LGBTQ community. So I always had a passion for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then worked a little bit right out of law school. I had no idea what I was going to do because I was not finding work in international law for international human rights law at all. And I really needed some money. And so a friend hooked me up with this small law firm that was doing, it was a personal injury law firm, and they did everything from auto accidents to dog bite cases. And I actually kind of fell in love with litigation. And I never was like moot court. I never did trials. I wasn't like a Perry Mason, like,
Wannabe.
yeah, I never was into trials at all. That
Yeah.
I was not into that. And then I really liked doing litigation. It was fun and it was exciting. And I felt like I was an advocate on someone's behalf. And that is a very like public interest, human rights background to advocate on behalf of someone else. Um, and I did have one case that was really impactful to me. It was someone that had spent years in working in a ferry system, not in New York, and developed a severe lung condition as a result of his like 20 plus years of devotion to this company. And when I met him was on oxygen. We didn't know if he was going to pass away before we even finished the case. And he was severely injured by his work and exposure to diesel fumes because
Sure.
this company did not take, I mean, it was gross negligence in how they handled the guys that worked in the engine rooms. And I don't know, I liked fighting for that guy. He was so awesome. And I really felt like this company that he devoted his life to had like totally did not care. I mean, they didn't take any precaution after years of being told diesel fumes can kill you, especially when you are
Inhale them on a daily
on
basis.
a regular basis. Yeah. And then I remember we did, I'm way off point, man. You asked me like one question. I'm
That's
like,
quite
go ahead.
This
That's
is your
what we're
show.
talking about
This
today.
is your show. Remember that. I told you to be yourself.
Talking about diesel engines and
Yeah.
not sexual assault survivors. But yeah, man. So the cool thing about litigation, one of them was like doing the investigation side of it. We actually like, you know, when you start a litigation, you have a right to inspect a property, or, you know, if you have a dog bite case, you have a right to go to that area and inspect where the dog was and all that to represent your client, right? So we got to be in these diesel engine rooms. I never would have had an opportunity in my life to go through. And we were doing like taking samples with our expert, and I learned all about diesel engines that I had I'd never learned. And so it was so cool.
Yeah, I mean, if people think about it, think about standing next to a semi and just sucking in from the exhaust valve for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week.
You get it exactly. I mean, that's almost verbatim our analogy. That's, and that's what we were saying. And
I did not know that. That was not a setup. That was not a plan, folks. I did not know that.
No, I mean, that's exactly what it was. That's exactly what we were arguing. And it was after companies knew better. It was after the EPA said, you can't keep doing this. And they did nothing to protect these guys. So, I mean, there were some that didn't make it. Some died before they could get any kind of compensation for their families, for their wrongful death or anything like that. But we did get one. And I had left that firm before that case finalized. But my understanding is they did settle, and it went really well. Good. So yeah. So anyway, all that was to say that I combined the two worlds, and I found that fighting in civil litigation really does help victims. And I know there's a lot of mixed feelings, about lawsuits, and we can talk about that. But for me,
we will.
Yeah, for me, that was how it started.
And so, how did you wind up then defending sexual assault survivors?
Yeah.
Or representing them, I should say, not defending them, representing them.
So I, after being at that law firm, and liking litigation, I realized I really did want to, I knew that was not a firm that I could bring in victims of sexual violence. I think when you work with victims of that level of trauma, you do need a supportive system and a supportive place to be their advocate. And that is not in any way to throw shade at that law firm. It just was not a law firm that that I felt I could bring in that type of clientele. It just wasn't that law firm. And I wanted to go out on my own. I mean, I really, as you know, Shauna, I mean, just, I don't know, being your own boss and running your own firm is amazing. And I feel like I have control and can help my clients the way I see fit when I started my own firm. So I broke out.
So you immediately went and did your own thing.
Yeah,
Good.
after several years, I don't maybe 3 years I was with them, and then
Yep.
decided to go out on my own.
Cool. Well, I have to ask this question because this is a personal feeling of mine, but I don't want to throw it on to you. In your work over the last years that you've been doing this, do you have a much lower opinion of the human race?
um, oh, I oh oh no, I no and yes. I mean, there's some stuff that it does seem so unfathomable that people would do that. There
Hmm.
really is. I mean, stuff. There's certain cases that they sound fictional. They're so awful.
Right.
And then on the flip side of that, I mean, there's some of my clients truly inspire me, and it's like an honor to represent them. What they survive and what they aspire to be. I mean, that's the beauty of it. Yeah. So you do see extremes of.
Well, and that's what I've always thought, and that's what sort of fascinated me about talking to you because until I was told what you did, I just knew you were a lawyer, but I didn't know what kind of law you practiced or what cases you took on. And I couldn't believe it in the beginning that you, with sort of the positivity and this is not meant to be a degradation word, but the perkiness that you have, the energy that you bring to the table, I couldn't fathom that you every day had to deal with the types of stories and the types of situations that you deal with.
Yeah.
How do you do that? How do you make that through? How does it not turn you into I just want to kill everybody?
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I don't know the answer. I can be very honest with you that I that's it's sometimes it is hard, and sometimes it does very much affect me. Um, I will be very honest that I also seek professional help while I go through this. I think that is actually important for me as an advocate to have someone to
Good.
turn to. I don't know how I would do this work if I didn't myself seek some kind of help, outside help, to get through stuff when it's too hard. But yeah, to be completely honest with you, and this about this story. I mean, while we were very much on lockdown during the pandemic, the earlier stages of March, I had a client that really, really messed with me. I mean, her story was very severe, and I didn't know if I could keep taking her. And a very credible client and a badly injured client. And when I say injured, I mean the emotional trauma and stress from what she went through. And it was a case that she had brought claims of child sexual abuse. But the level and the type of child sexual abuse was very severe and one I had never come across before. And so that took some extra work. I mean, I really had to back away. But I guess there's other things we all attorneys do or even if you're a social worker or ever coming in touch with that kind of awfulness. I mean, you do learn how to cope with it, and there are skills to kind of detach. I know people I have a friend who, for him, once he's home and he opens his door, that's it. He does not talk about work to his wife. He does not talk about work at all. And he's only a child sexual abuse litigator. I don't think he takes any other kind of cases at all except child sexual abuse. And that's his thing. That's how he shuts down, is that's it. He won't, you can't talk to him on the weekend about it or anything like that. So,
But even that, I mean, it because I know how I emotionally react when I see these stories, and I don't even know all the details. I mean, you just know what the media is comfortable making publicly available. So I'm always amazed at those people who are able to work on the intimate inside of these cases. And so you talk about you go to outside help to help you get through it, but from a legal situation, where does the U.S. stand currently when it comes to sexual abuse claims, whether they be from adults, children, or whomever. And then we'll talk about obviously some of the more notorious ones that have come to light in the last few years. But I want to get your take on where you see things currently.
And when you ask that question, do you just mean like how do I feel that the majority of the country?
Well, how's the law looking at it now from your perspective?
Well, I think some great changes have been made. I guess I'll take child sexual abuse first. I mean, that was something so hidden, as we all know. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's seen Spotlight, and that was still, even with that, I mean, it was so. I mean, I guess that was a big thing for me when I started taking on clergy cases was, and there's, I have to take very little credit. I mean, there's guys that have been doing this and been crusaders in this, crusaders in a good way, I should use a different term, but have been pioneers and suing churches and getting this message out for years before I ever was doing child sexual abuse cases. But I think that, really, it has turned so much, but I think it wasn't just, and the church is such an easy example, but, why have cases against?
Well, Larry Nassar.
It doesn't have to be the church or even other religious institutions. It's not just, I think the upsetting thing about the Catholic Church was it's not just being hidden or moved priests around. It was like welcoming of pedophiles. Like that, I think that was the most upsetting thing. And we are, that exposure of that. And that we're seeing it in other places, like you say, that with doctors, that's really been in a good way a huge upset. I think the beautiful thing in the way it's turning is that I think we used to just default to these people as gods. You don't. Even as a lawyer, I have to watch that. I have clients that will just defer to me, and I'm like, no. I'm not it doesn't matter if it's a lawyer, a doctor, a priest. Like, these are not gods. They do wrong things, and we need to hold them accountable when they do. We don't just say because you were an Olympic athlete that, that's a case I'd love to talk to you about. But yeah, just because you're an Olympic athlete, you're allowed to abuse, and we just move it away because we want money and students at our university. We are getting away from that thanks to the Me Too movement, and where we are now suing for child sexual abuse. I think that's huge. I think we are kind of dethroning, so to speak, these power structures that are abusing their power,
Well, and I think to a certain extent, the media is no longer afraid of certain institutions, so they're not worried about exposing it for fear of blowback, usually from a financial standpoint, but also from a PR standpoint. So they're willing to make it public now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we saw that with Epstein, right? Like that was Vanity Fair was like, we're not touching it. And now we all know about it,
Well, now there's like 5 different documentaries that are all saying the exact same thing, but they all get tremendous ratings because people are looking for one little nugget that the other one didn't have and whatnot, or a smoking gun.
Right.
So I want to let people know, at least you were on the news a couple weeks ago, or at least a week ago, based on when we're recording this, because you were giving a statement after, I forget what it was, but the publicity around this, is that a good thing, or any publicity around sexual assault? Is it good or is it bad? Or is it a depends answer?
I think it, you mean if there's any cases that get publicity and
I mean, because sometimes I think I look at the way certain stories are portrayed and I'm thinking that might convince people to come forward, or that might convince them, no, I'm keeping my mouth shut because I don't want to go through that.
I think it does depend. It really does depend. And as an attorney, I have to do what my client wants in the best interest of my client, which is an interesting place to be. I mean, sometimes I'm not the ACLU, right? I'm not, I am not in furtherance of a movement. I mean, I am, that's what I'm about. But
Right, but the
I
movement
represent
is
my
client
client
specific.
is my fiduciary duty is to my client,
Yeah.
right? Like your attorney and their fiduciary duty is to the corporation. Like mine is to my client. So that does become an issue where if it's the best interest of my client to say she doesn't want to proceed using her real name and she wants to go, I have to honor that. And I have to respect that that's what she's choosing, and I have to fight for her right to be a Jane Doe in a sexual assault case, or vice versa. There may be a client that really wants to be public about this, and as her attorney, I advise her and give her guidance. But at the end of the day, that's who I work for, and I don't. Does that make sense? What I'm saying, the
Oh,
difference
no, no,
between
no.
me,
Yeah,
and
no,
ACLU,
I get it.
you know, because I
Yeah.
know there's cases like where the ACLU is taken. I'm using the ACLU as the only one I can think of where they've, in furtherance of the movement, done cases, but the client has gotten lost in the mix. And um, I I don't know enough about this to really speak on this, but I think isn't that kind of what happened with the Citadel and that one woman that sued?
See, I don't
Um,
know. Yeah, I
yeah,
know
I don't
the
know.
people you're
I
talking about,
shouldn't bring it up.
but yeah, but I don't know the details enough of how that all,
Yeah,
how the wave started. And
yeah.
then, and if people go back and look, I forget the woman's name, but there was something that sort of to where she faded into the background. And to your point, the word movement became the forerunner for whatever was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can speak. I know that about certain sex workers when there's been sex workers' rights movements and
Hmm.
sex workers going forward. I know of sex workers that have felt like their voice was trampled in the name of trying to get sex workers' rights
Right.
at the forefront. And then, because it's just different. Whereas if I'm not sex workers attorney, I'm there for her rights, not the
Right.
movement of the sex workers as a whole. So if she wants to do something that kind of goes against the movement, I honor her rights. So that's kind of an interesting place to be when you're an attorney.
So I want to pause one second. Have you ever had a male client?
Oh yeah, yes,
Okay.
several.
Because
Yeah,
you were referring to her, but I want to make sure that people
yeah.
understand that this is not just one gender
No, that's
specific.
fair. Thank you. Yeah. In fact, I have a lot. In fact, most of my clergy abuse cases are men, which I don't think would surprise anybody
No.
really. Um, and I've had women perpetrator cases. I have a case in a school setting with a teacher as a perpetrator that's a woman.
Well, maybe we'll touch on that, but I want to go back to your use of the term Jane Doe, because anybody who watched the Larry Nassar sentencing proceedings, or even up to forget the sentencing and the victims speakouts, the whole case itself, there were a lot of women who publicly came forward, but there were a lot who didn't. And before we get to the choice of staying a Jane Doe or actually using your name, is there any universality when it comes to keeping a accuser's slash victim's name off the record? Is it like, is there any universality on the federal level, on the state's levels, or is it state by state? Does the federal depend on what jurisdiction you're in? How's that
Um,
work?
the law or people's choice? What the law said? You asked me
Yeah,
what the
let's
law
say what the
said?
law says,
Yeah.
and then we'll
No,
talk
that's
to the people's choices.
excellent question. It is unclear. It is inconsistent. It depends on state. There is not a um, clear answer to that. I am barred in New York. I work in New York. In New York, there is something called the New York Civil Rights Law 50B. New York Civil Rights Law 50A has been in the news a lot. It's totally different. I'm just putting that out there. That has to do with getting records from the NYPD. That kind of came out with all of the Black Lives Matter movement stuff.
Sure.
That's not at issue here. 50B is about a victim of a sexual offense being allowed to be anonymous in all public court documents. I argue, and I argue for my clients, that that means any public case, they have if you are alleging a victim, that you're a victim, if you are coming forward and saying you've been the victim of a sexual offense, that you have a right to proceed using a fake name in any public proceeding, criminal, civil. If somebody does a Freedom of Information Act request, your name is to be redacted. Now, not all judges agree with me. And I have cases.
Wait,
Yeah.
wait a second.
So, and just to backpedal a little bit, it's just different, and not backpedal in the sense of taking back my argument, in the sense of just taking us back just a step. Most of the time what happens is somebody, so for a starting point, for a baseline, if you sue somebody, if you have a lawsuit, so say you sue your office building because you slip and fall. Mm-hmm. You're going to do a lawsuit. You have to put your full name, Sean. Sure. You have to put your name. You can't be anonymous. You can't. This is an open system. We have a public right to everybody
know your accuser.
Know your accuser and know and have a public forum. So the plaintiff is named, the defendant named. If I do a slip and fall, Kathleen Thomas is a public document. Now, that's a baseline. Now, some courts in the cases and in statutes have held and said that in certain circumstances you can be anonymous. We know that anyone under 18, a child, is anonymous just because they are. It doesn't matter what kind of case. Dog bite case, you're anonymous. You use initials. At least in New York. I mean, I think in almost every actually in New York and on the federal level, you're anonymous. And child sexual abuse, that's another common one that people say we call it a privacy interest, that you have a privacy interest. In New York, again, there's this New York civil rights law, but also in cases in the court system, they've said if you're a victim of a sexual assault or child sexual abuse, you should be allowed to be a pseudonym, be a fake name. It does depend. In New York, it's a really heated issue. In other jurisdictions, it's not as much, but it is very much inconsistent, and there's all kinds of discussion around it. And I've had to fight for people's right to be a pseudonym. But I am definitely of the standpoint that if you want to be a pseudonym in a sexual assault case, you should be allowed to be.
So is that an argument that has to be settled before you file suit? Or do you file suit under the pseudonym and then make notice of that?
Yeah, that's a very lawyer question.
I play one on TV, so
yeah.
You know.
Well, yeah, it's definitely a good question, and it does depend. The Child Victim Act. So when we, I don't know how much you want me to go into what the Child Victim Act is that's allowing people to bring lawsuits
like I said,
right now in New York.
This is your show. Go for it.
You'll edit down whatever you need to.
Nope, no editing. This is recorded live. People are going to learn.
Just don't want to learn this. So New York passed something called the Child Victim Act, and there's been all kinds of commercials about this. If you've been abused as a child, if you were sexually abused, you have this 1-year window to bring a lawsuit. It doesn't matter how old you're claiming. It doesn't matter if you're 90 years old, if you're 35 years old. You have this 1 year. If your case is too old to now bring it, if you were time barred because of a statute of limitations, meaning your case was too old, you can now bring it for 1 year. And the whole idea was that all this child sexual abuse was happening at things like in Catholic churches. So now let's give people 1 year to seek restorative justice. That brought a lot of cases into New York. This is why I'm explaining this. That brought a whole bunch of lawsuits into New York. So judges have been allowing people to proceed under a pseudonym, and then if the defendant argues and says they shouldn't, then they kind of battle it out.
Gotcha.
Otherwise, in New York, you do have to ask permission first.
Okay.
Generally.
So, but that's under a child, so I'm assuming that's under 18.
No, adult.
Oh, adult too. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you were an adult,
it had to happen when you were a child.
Correct. Yeah.
It applies. Okay. So let's say actually though the victim is older than 18.
Okay. Yeah.
how's that process work? Is it the same way that you sort of file your legal action under a pseudonym and then it's argued in front of the judge?
Yeah. So so in New York, again, I can only speak to New York State Court. Yep. If someone is alleging a sexual assault, they would have to go and ask for permission to file the lawsuit using a fake name and make their argument. And this is disputed. I mean, again, I'm of the position that you say, look, I was a sexual assault victim. There's this law that protects me. I would be further harmed if I was to proceed using my real name. I've already suffered trauma. You support your motion to the court, and then they'd say that's fine. Hopefully they would say that's fine. You can proceed as a Jane Doe. Mm-hmm. But sometimes the defendant says, no, you're not allowed to do that. We dispute this. And there's a whole argument. Judges have found that sometimes even in child sexual abuse cases, judges have found that plaintiffs aren't allowed to pursue using a pseudonym.
Okay, and we won't get into the arguments as to why they did that, because we'll be here forever reading LexisNexis on there. So then let me play opposing counsel and ask you this. Should the accused have the same right of anonymity until a verdict is reached?
No.
And what's your argument on that?
Well, there's several. One is that like I said, the starting point is we want an open court system. We want everybody to be named. And then there's been a public interest, and especially here in New York, that we actually do want to afford victims of sexual violence additional protections under the law, because we as a society have recognized that there's severe underreporting of rape and sexual assault. There's victim blaming, there's stigmatization, there's a whole slew of problems in addition to try and come forward and naming a perpetrator. So as a starting point, there's been this strong public interest and push, and it's been in the law that a victim of sexual violence can proceed under a pseudonym. Now, as someone that's accused and been accused of rape, I do fully recognize that can be very disruptive. I mean, if you're accused and let's say it is a false accusation, and by the way, false accusations are very rare, and the statistics on it are, I mean, I can't quote them because I don't know, but they're under 5% are actually found to be a false accusation because of what victims have to go through in order to even bring a claim or bring a criminal case or any of that. However, that is disruptive. But the argument is that so is any other lawsuit, and to be an alleged defendant in any lawsuit sucks. I can't argue that it wouldn't. But we do want to weigh in favor of trying to finally get people held accountable and have perpetrators held accountable, and that's kind of one argument. And then and that's also to say it is a public safety issue. I mean, we know, like, for example, there's a doctor that's well known now, Dr. Haddon. I mean, you don't want to call him a doctor anymore. He's been, I mean, he's not just far
stripped of his license.
He was horrific. I mean, he was, I know you put that disclaimer out. I mean, the stuff he was doing to even 13-year-old girls. He's a gynecologist, and he was licking girls in places while they were pregnant, very pregnant, and I couldn't see what was going on. And other victims have been able to go forward because his name was public. He was publicly named. We don't want to go backwards and have named accusers in the dark.
So let me stop you there real quick, because I want to differentiate. And again, this is me playing the devil's advocate on the opposing counsel side.
Yeah.
You're on the civil side. Let's say there's been no criminal case. Let's say only a civil case. Does that change your thinking? Because then the person being accused he's not guilty, or she's not guilty of anything except being accused.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. And it does not change my mind.
Okay.
And here's why. One is that, so let's say even in a criminal case, wait, did you say he was?
There was no criminal case.
No criminal case. Okay.
Yeah,
Or
it's
there was,
just a civil accusation.
so if there's no criminal case, so if there, I just want to, because there's kind of different arguments for each level of these. Okay.
Right. So there's no criminal complaint registered, but somebody filed a civil
Okay. So
complaint
that wouldn't
against them.
change anything for me at all, in the sense that if they didn't go the criminal route, I would still, I mean, I don't think that changes whether they're allowed to be a Jane Doe and the defendant is not. I mean, I don't think, I mean, that wouldn't change my answer across the board if they did go the civil route. However, one of the big arguments is, let's say in the criminal side, this person, the prosecutor did not bring charges. There was a criminal complaint made. The prosecutor said, hey, there's not enough here. I can't work with this. And the case was dismissed. Or maybe there wasn't even an arrest made, but
Right.
the accuser went to the NYPD, made the accusations, and the case was dropped and they didn't find enough. Let's say that accused is going around claiming they've been vindicated. That would not change my mind, because one, in a criminal case, a prosecutor is the one bringing the case, not the victim. The victim has no control. It's what the prosecutor does. And the prosecutor has the highest burden of proof. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this person did it. So let's say the prosecutor does believe the accuser, but there's just not enough for them to work with to win that high burden of proof in a jury trial. They will not bring the criminal case. This happens all the time. I've had so many DAs tell me they believe my client, but because she was drinking, they have an extra step. Even
Right.
if they're drinking, there's still a criminal case to be had. That is for another topic or another day, but
Maybe a part two.
maybe a part two.
Two.
But so that's one. And then I just, was writing a lot about this because there was this investigation came out in 2018, 165-page report on the Special Victims Division of NYPD. And it goes into detail about how bad the sex crimes unit is and how understaffed and undersourced, and how so many sexual assaults were not being prosecuted because of how badly it was run. I mean, there's lawsuits right now against the NYPD for how they mishandled people's cases. There's a woman that's been very public about, she was raped in a Uber or a Lyft. I can't remember. And she was like taken across to New Jersey, it went to the FBI because she was taken across state line.
Oh, so that became a federal offense.
Well, just wait for it. So she at gunpoint was raped in a I think it was Uber, was raped and at gunpoint and was taken across the state line. She went to NYPD. They mishandled her case. She was told by FBI agents they pretty much destroyed her case because of the mishandling of it. And this is the prime, like a white woman raped at gunpoint in an Uber. This is like this isn't an acquaintance rape where people feel a little ickier about, where it's a little grayer for people. And so this report also talks about the, when it's an acquaintance rape, when it's someone else knows. I mean, it's like, the report was like, these kind of rape cases like don't stand a chance. They're not taken seriously. It is like, oh, you just had a bad night and now want to accuse them of rape. So it's there's so much against someone in the criminal justice system. There's so much against someone trying to report that I don't let that stand in the way of my allowing someone or feeling like I can represent someone that's a civil case. With that said, I have to do my own investigation research if it's a case I can stand behind and a case I can represent someone. And that's separate than me. I never depend my case on the criminal side because I know how awful it is. I know how awful, especially the Manhattan DA's office. So I don't rely on that. That's separate than me doing an intake and investigation, finding that there may be reasons that I can't take the case.
Right. So do shows like Law and Order, SVU just drive you nuts?
To be honest with you, I've never really seen a full episode.
Okay.
I've never watched them.
20 years you've been hiding from the Law and Order
I know,
SVU
I know.
onslaught? Come on,
Well, I
Kat.
know because it's like I don't want to. When I want something entertaining, I just want something.
Right, yeah. You want to get out of your
Yeah,
your own
I don't
field,
want
exactly.
this greatest British baking show.
Well, that's why I don't watch a lot of hacker movies because they just butcher the technology so bad that it frustrates me.
Yeah.
But so again, so popular entertainment is one thing, but documentaries are another thing. And there have been obviously Epstein's been the big one. There's Athlete A about Larry Nasser and the U.S. Olympic Gymnastics Committee or organization and their failures.
Yeah.
There's Outcry. I don't know if you saw Outcry
Oh, that
about the
one.
kid. So high school kid in Texas accused by a young boy of inappropriately touching him. And then you have to see it because I don't want to give it away for the viewers. You have to see it. It's on Showtime, I believe. It's called Outcry.
Okay.
Does that, do those things, do those pieces of documentary, let's call them, not even the entertainment, the mass entertainment, but do those documentary efforts help your cause, hurt it? Maybe it's still to be determined.
No, I think it does in the sense that it is getting the message out there and making it okay for others to come forward. And I've had many people call me, and I've had many people say, watching, for example, this is a true example. Someone that was like, I saw the documentary on the hot yoga guy,
Oh yeah,
the
yep.
Bikram, and they're
Yep.
like, I just couldn't be silent anymore. Like when I heard their stories, I was like, oh my God, that happened to me. And it's really kind of busting up the silence. Like there's not a shame in coming forward, So I think it does absolutely help. It makes people feel like they're not alone.
So what did you think about, did you watch any of the Larry Nasser victim statements and that whole sentencing portion? I know you were probably busy during it, but I mean, did you catch any of it?
I
And if you
did.
did, what did
Yeah.
you think
Yeah,
about the victims coming forward?
I think that's really powerful. I think it is. I think it was emotional for me to watch. And just to let people know, you can't do something like that on the civil side. That's a criminal case
Right, yeah.
animal. So I've had people ask if they can do that. I mean, and if you want to do a settlement, sometimes you can settle when you're doing settlement, you can ask to do something like that. But anyway, yeah, I found it very powerful. I mean, it felt like they were being heard, and I think that, to be honest with you, I think, to go back to our Jane Doe point, I think I'm going to start seeing more, and already I see more people choosing to use real names than Jane Doe's.
That's great.
It's absolutely okay to be a Jane Doe, and there's lots of reasons. I mean, lots of reasons to
Sure.
be Jane Doe. Everything from you are a powerful figure and you don't want to be accused of just doing this for political gain to maybe you are in an immigrant family and in a vulnerable population, and you using your real name you feel like will destroy your family.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always a reason, and I do strongly believe in Jane Doe's being allowed to come forward as a Jane Doe. But I think the trend is going to continue that more people feel like they can use their real name in these cases.
Well, and I mean, you see the outrage, but you see the outrage after the fact. But and I mean, you weren't involved in the Nasser case, but you have been involved in some of the Catholic Church, and I think we should keep the Catholic Church separate because there's so many variables, and it's the length of the cover up is raises too many. Well, it raises too many variables to talk about here. Again, maybe that's part 3 on there. But an institution like Michigan State, where one of their students comes forward, makes the complaint, more than one student, I believe, really at the end of the day, when you go back and look at it, and they do nothing.
Yeah.
when you get into a court case, what is the reason why they do nothing? Doesn't it hurt more to do nothing than it does to say, you know what, you're a
Yeah.
bad guy. We're going to investigate, and if and then turn it over to the police to say we found credible evidence, and come out looking like a supporter of the right thing to do.
You would think so. You are.
Yeah, but what do you find when you get into that situation? Why do they think it's better to go the opposite way and cover it
I,
up?
oh, I don't know why they do it, but it's unfortunately so common. I think it is. I mean, you saw it with like the Sandusky cases, right? And this
Yeah.
case I am working on, where there's an Olympic athlete, and it's like that notoriety they want associated. Like if this is a star football player, like I said, the Sandusky case is this star. I mean, Penn State, there's still people that don't believe those victims, which is insane. But it is this like I said, it's like protecting these high, powerful people, and it doesn't make sense. Like, wouldn't you think you would want to report it if you had a bad actor and clear your name as an institution? But I mean, like I said, we saw it with the Dr. Hayden case. There's another one, Dr. Cruciani, that at Beth Israel, that's been criminally accused and civil, in civil lawsuits, and across several jurisdictions. I was trying to think of where the criminal case is right now in New York, but it's just that he's been accused. Anyway, that is another case of a doctor who who's been accused of sexual assault against his victims at a large scale. I mean, multiple victims across different states, and these institutions just covered it up. And to your point, wouldn't you want to just get rid of this actor? But the prestige behind him, or whatever the reason, it doesn't really make sense. I don't know why. I'm sure in retrospect, those institutions wish they had gotten rid of him instead of what they're going through now. But it doesn't make sense. The only thing I can think of is, at the time, like I said, they're just, this is some famous Olympian or some famous doctor, and they just want the money that comes in with it. More often than not, it's the money and the profit over this measly little person they think that they don't even believe, in their eyes.
Well, I'm sure the $500 million that Michigan State had to set aside, and then their insurance carrier saying, we're not paying any more claims on this. This is all you guys. Maybe there is a bit of regret at this point.
And this stuff works. I wouldn't do civil law if I didn't think it worked. I don't want to put people in prison. That's why I don't want to do that. But to like hit their pocketbook works. I mean, you see forced reporting now. You see like changes are made. It's unfortunate that the only way they do it is if you hit their wallet, but that's when you do see a change. When you publicly hold them accountable and say this institution was hiding this serial rapist, knowing that they were a serial rapist, knowing that this doctor had women in his room, in his office for over an hour, when that made no sense to anyone. And then, the next person would be a 10-minute little checkup. And then certain patients of theirs were in there for hours and were doped up on high levels of opiates so he could rape them. And they knew about it. Like it's disturbing.
It boggles your mind.
Yeah, it boggles my mind, but it's forcing change. There are new reporting systems in place. They are being held accountable so that stuff changes. Their insurance companies force them to change. They're like, if you want to be insured again, you have to have a specialist come in. You have to do these reports. This kind of quality control person has to be there. I mean, it does force a change on these institutions that are covering up sexual abuse.
And I try to keep track of the time because we're approaching 45 minutes, and I could go for another 4 hours with you. But if you're looking at, so I don't want to say you're a legal advocate. I want to put a qualifier on that for people so that they understand the distinction. You're a legal advocate for your clients.
Yeah.
If somebody is in a situation or has experienced a situation where they know something was done to them that was not right, do they do they immediately come to somebody like you, or do they immediately go to law enforcement? Do they seek out just somebody else's advice? I mean, what do you tell people on how to say, yeah, come forward and tell what happened to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's whatever the victim needs to do to heal. But if they do, I mean, I would strongly, even as much as I don't like the state of the police department, and I don't like how things are handled, at least bringing the criminal case, or seeing if that's an option is a first step. If they really feel like, they have been sexually abused or sexually assaulted, um, you know, let me put a disclaimer on top of that. If it is a child, they should be bringing it to someone they feel safe to talk to about it. And as a responsible adult, it should be reported right away. If someone comes to you you need to report it. You need to report it to the police.
Okay. And that's where we're going to end it, because you'll eventually wind up with Kat, because as you can tell, if you want somebody fighting for you, that woman over there is probably as strident and as powerful as you want at your back. So hey, thank you again for doing this. I told you it was going to go fast.
I know.
None of these conversations have ever dragged, and unfortunately, I don't have, neither one of us has the 2 hours to go and really get into things, because I didn't even ask you about the new federal rules that we had talked about over lunch and what have you. And so, like I said, I think there will be a part 2, possibly a part 3, because this world is ever changing. You just have to wait for the legal gears to grind slowly forward on it. But thank you very much. I really appreciate this. Thanks for being so open about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I hope to come back, and I'm excited that you're doing this. This is awesome. This is important work. So we need conversations. We need to have open conversations about these about topics that don't always feel great, but are important to have.
Well, you know what? Maybe next time we'll just set up a camera, you and I, at lunch, because we had a really great conversation at lunch, and I figured let's just set up the camera at lunch, and I don't have to worry about the lights and all this stuff going on and whatnot. So,
I love the idea. I love it.
Well, thanks, Kat. I appreciate it.
I will talk to you soon.
Yep, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in. The link to Kat's firm is down in the descriptions and the details. You can check out her bio there. And again, if you like the video and you want to see more, there's more on the channel, or you can hit the subscribe button with the bell so that you can get future episodes. Again, for Kat Thomas, I am Sean O'Rourke. Thanks again for tuning in to Did You Know That? And we'll see you all later. Bye.